Real digital humans.
Hi, and you're on the podcast Real Digital Humans. I'm your host, Stefan Albert, and we are sponsored by Aisha. Now, today we have a special guest today, Cristine Trayner, who is an expert in HR and works in the area of early childhood education. So maybe, Cristine, if you could take a few minutes to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is a very exciting conversation. I'm pumped to be here. I lead the talent acquisition team for Little Sprouts, and we are a network of 39 early childhood education centers across 4 states in New England, which is in the United States. And we have about 1,100 or so employees. I work on a team of 5, and our setup is a little bit different. Talent is housed underneath marketing and sales, or aligned with sales. And we also get involved from a talent perspective in the beginning of the employee experience.
Well, now we've already had a bit of a background discussion some weeks back. And it seems you have some interesting thoughts on where digital humans could be maybe supportive or not. We were looking at, both the HR function as well as what could it mean in the whole world of early childhood development. Um, I think that the quote that probably struck me the most was, "A digital human is not going to change nappies, is it?" And I think I think we can probably fully agree that we're not there yet. Um, but there's probably lots of things that it could do. Now, maybe it would be good to start thinking about, some of the challenges that you have in managing a center. Where I'm sure you have lots of people coming in and out of different roles. Need to really build up their sense of belonging and being part of a team, manage them, from the very first step all the way through to when they may leave. So I'd like to talk a little bit around how you see the space of digital humans there. What are the challenges and where digital humans maybe help? And then let's start thinking of some of the roles that you're actually hiring, and maybe could one day these be fulfilled by a digital human, at least partially, or at least supported. So over to you, Christine. What would you say maybe a couple of the biggest challenges that you're seeing now when it comes to your core role of hiring talent?
So in the early childhood phase, there's a lot to unpack in your question. So I'll start with that last bit. Early childhood is challenging to hire for it. It is different here in the United States than it is in Europe. And it's a hard, well, very challenging, physically challenging job. So we, in the United States, early childhood consists of 0 to 5 years old. And so if you're considering the positions that we're looking for, it's, 9 hours a day or with a, break in between. And you're with small children, and it's also very ratio based. So there's a certain amount of children to adults, and that is all state and federally regulated, those numbers for the care ratios. So it's challenging for us because there are a lot of regulations around the industry and the individuals that we can hire. So two of the biggest, or two of the main positions that we hire for are assistant teachers. They don't technically need to be super qualified, and I'm going to add a caveat to that, that this is assisting the primary teacher who is certified, has gone through a college level course, and has X amount of experience in caring for certain age groups. Specifically, you can be infant and toddler, and then you can be preschool age. So some people are cross certified, but I say all that to say, like, there's a wider net for the assistant teachers because you don't need to have a lot of experience. We can actually train you. But for the certified or the teacher qualified candidates, that's a much smaller, more shallow pool. So even just talking about this has brought up the idea of how we would support assistant teachers, or how a digital human could support assistant teachers in their career growth. And that I think translates also to certified teachers or teacher qualified individuals, and how they might want to advance their career in early childhood. So does that mean that, you've got someone to consistently ask questions to? Because typically speaking, it's, a lead teacher or teacher qualified in the classroom is partnered with an assistant teacher, and the assistant teacher learns through the modeling of the qualified teacher how a classroom is run, how a lesson plan or a curriculum is delivered, and so many more things. How to change a nappy, for example. But I think it would be
Me too,
interesting
that.
to it would be interesting to consider, if there was a digital human present, would then the focus for the assistant teacher when they need a question answered, as opposed to it being the qualified teacher in the room, could it also be at the digital human? Because then the qualified teacher's attention wouldn't be pulled away from the children that they're watching.
So I think we've started with one challenge straight away that I think is really interesting is, how do you do knowledge enhancement, knowledge development? And I've been seeing with one client, he's written a book. He's an expert public speaker, and it's one of those things where everyone has lots of questions. How can I improve my public speaking? And we're able to take his methodology, and then we can turn it into a set of questions and answers, or you can ask ChatGPT to read this book, and I have a question for you, and get the best advice from the best experts out there. Now, the first question is, could this be better than asking a human? I mean, could you actually maybe get better answers than what a human would say? Maybe, maybe not. I think that would be a good challenge out to put out there. And the second one is, would people learn better by having a human representation, so the digital human, versus, let's say, going on ChatGPT and getting a text? And I think this is one of the key challenges, is to understand where's the deepest value from a digital human. Do they need that human presence to assist with learning, which in many cases it can and does, or is it something which is so trivial and easy? It's sort of like you don't need it. You just literally just need a text, and you're okay, and it's quicker and faster and easy. So this would be maybe a question for you. Do you think this is an area where people need that human connection?
Yeah, short answer, yes. I know that from a personal standpoint, I learn more effectively when I'm watching someone do it, and then I get to try it, as opposed to just reading text. And that becomes very, very dry. And I really support the whole idea of modeling behavior. So where I think a digital human would be better than just leveraging Chat GPT would be in that almost human interaction, where you are like, I'm looking at you right now, and if I'm asking you a question, you are answering me. And a digital human is going to look like that, even though we're on a screen. But at this point, we're so familiar with screens
Yep.
that
Very-
it seems very organic. And why wouldn't I interact with your digital human like I would with you? And so I think it's twofold. Like, the digital human would be there to address the question in the moment, and then it would be reinforced by teacher or the lead teacher in the room, who would then continue modeling the behavior. So if perfect scenario, right? Like, I say, Stefan, how do I change a nappy? What are the 5 steps? And there are many more than that, by the way. But I don't know them all. So what are the 5 steps? And then you list off, your digital human lists off all of those 5 steps, and then while they're listing it off, maybe they're doing. And then when I go to actually do that, the lead teacher in the room is there to reinforce, oh, here are the 5 steps. Did you hit all of those, Christine? And if not, then here, watch me do it. So I think that's where the digital human could augment the actual human.
I mean, it's interesting as well because one thing, so I've got a little daughter. She's almost 3 and she's been through all that. I'm glad we're on the other side of that now. She decided at about 2.5 to stop wearing nappies and we were okay with that. So it worked out for everyone. But it's not just nappies. There's so many different ways. How do you teach a kid to brush their teeth?
Mm.
And we do it differently at home than they do it in what we call the Cripper, the kids club. And could that be confusing for a child? So as a parent, would you actually also like to be able to say, okay, my childcare center uses a certain methodology. They've actually got a digital human. And as a parent, I can access that same knowledge base and I can have that same conversation and I can do things the same way. It's like, oh, how should I brush their teeth? Oh, they're not listening to me. What should I do? It's like, should I do a timeout? Should I put the corner? And, I know that there's lots of different ways of doing it, but sometimes, consistency is truth. As long as things are not too different between home and there, everyone will get along. And you've got many different centers. You also don't want every center doing things differently. If in case you want to cross staff, it's nice to have a sort of a standard methodology that's been maybe scientifically proven. So the more we talk about it, the more I start to like this concept that I would have actually thought came from, the HR hiring role, but it actually makes a lot of sense and may make your job easier, particularly for the less trained people, because you know that you can get them onboarded easily. And this actually does come up a lot in discussions, like how do you onboard someone? Because there's so much information. You can tell them, here's a textbook. Obviously that doesn't work. You can tell them, here's the bookshelf of textbooks, or websites that we use, etc. It's maybe better because then you know where to go, but sometimes you just want question answer.
Yeah.
And if you're young and you're new, you can have lots of questions, lots of answers. And that might mean lots of interruptions.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it with like on the parent end, going back to that, because I think it's very interesting. And then you brought up consistency, which in a business that's growing, especially a service-based business, that's what I would liken to scalability. So when you're able to train in a consistent manner and the messaging and the content is the same, and yet it's interactive and engaging, you are able to grow much faster because you can train people faster and onboard them faster. And then the idea of understanding from the parent's view what's happening in the school and what training the teachers are receiving. Because I don't have children, but many of my friends do. I'm a godparent, lots of nieces and nephews. And that has been a conversation, especially around potty training. So what are they doing at the school? Because she's potty trained at school, but when she gets home, the wheels come off and we don't know what to do. And, teachers have some time to share with the parents, okay, well, this is what we do at school, but how do you replicate that at home? And having the ability to share what the procedure is or the practice is in the school with the parents, everyone's everyone's on the same page at that point. And we can avoid maybe telling your kid a different thing at home than she's hearing in class or at school. So again, with, just consistency across different environments. And that would provide not success for the parents, but also success inside the HR function, where we're looking at making sure that individuals are properly trained and supporting them through their educational development as teachers.
Very, very cool. So we kind of have two use cases, but it's actually the same tool can actually do two things. It can training the internal people in a consistent, standardized way, and that same tool can train parents to also follow if they want to, if they choose to, obviously, but even have the option to follow and do things in the same way without having to spend too long always asking different questions. And I think, also as a parent, you sometimes don't want to, especially if it's your first child, you don't want to come across being a little bit dumb and naive and say, well, how do I change a nappy? You know, you know, I'm having some issues. I'm having some blowouts. Help me. It's not something you really want to do, but actually it would be a really helpful thing. I mean, I know I used Google significantly in my early childhood parenting days. And there's some great information and really great knowledge, but it can take quite a lot of time to get to. And I haven't been able to always choose based on knowledge, what are the best sources. But, you have experts in the field. They can choose the best sources. They can agree on a standard methodology that works, scientifically proven to work, and, offer that up as a baseline.
I think what you're talking about is a user manual for parenting.
Yeah. That's an operating instructions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Standard SOPs, standard operating procedures. Yeah. Christ,
So-
this.
And you don't get that as a parent. So, I mean, it's
There's no
not
manual.
something that they hand you when you leave the hospital and say, here's your SOP for your new child. It's more of a, well, there's some good books out there. Good luck. Tell
Yeah.
us if there's something you need.
Mm.
So user manual.
Yeah. And you guys have to deal with everything from mental health to meltdowns to physical, things. It would be great to have at least some guidance, even if the guidance is, hey, these can be some medical issues, definitely see definitely see a doctor straight away.
Yeah. And I think that started and this is a bit of an aside, but I promise it can tie back to what we're talking about. We have started instituting something called First Up Health, and it's a purely digital platform for, well, primary care and also for urgent care. So emergency healthcare. And it's free to users, and you don't have to be enrolled in our healthcare benefits because, again, here in the United States, healthcare is a little bit different than it is in Europe. And so not only is that platform like it's not a digital human. I will come out and say it's a real person that you're talking to. However, I can see where there's an intersection between that technology where you don't actually have to leave your house, go to the ER or urgent care and sit there and wait just to find out, oh, well, you just have a mild fever, go home. We're not giving you anything. So instead of that, it's more of a space where you can talk to someone digitally. They can assess, yes, I think you should go to the ER. You do need to see a physician. Or no, it's a virus. We're not going to give you antibiotics because it's virus. It's not bacterial. So, in thinking about where the intersection is between that, I think with the, on the allergy end of things, and my brain immediately went to, would I ever hire a digital human? Maybe, because if they were in the classroom and someone went to go feed a child something that they might be allergic to, or there's a known allergy, before putting that plate of peanuts, for example, on the table, they could ask the digital human in the room, does Stefan and Christine have a peanut allergy? Or are there any children in this room with a peanut allergy? Digital human could spit out, Christine is allergic, Stefan is fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, yes. That's exactly where my brain went with that one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The healthcare one, always a salient point, how far should you go with a digital human or a digital AI of any kind, in supporting people, and if something goes wrong, who is accountable? So many open questions there. In most regulatory setups I've seen, giving information. So it's okay. Like, what is it? If you have a cough, what could it be? And then you're allowed to give general information and saying, okay, well, like you would on the internet, hey, a cough usually come from one of, three different things, A, B, and C. This is what it'll look like for A. This will look like for B. This will look like for C. But it won't say, based on what you said, you have A, and therefore you do or don't need to go to a hospital.
Mm.
What point, how far can you go down that until it becomes a medical device? And if it's a medical device, how do you manage accountability, risk, medical insurance, potentially all of these things that then come into play? Um, so very useful potentially, but with that high value comes also high risk.
Yeah, for sure. My brain went to what would WebMD tell me? Because it sounds like it's sort of along those lines, right? Because you'll put in your symptoms, and WebMD will come up and tell you, well, it's one of XYZ. And then obviously, maybe it's just me, but I go right to the one that's the worst. And that's definitely what I have. And then I have to go see my husband and be like, babe, I think it's this. And he's like, I don't support that idea. What did you do? Did you Google said symptoms? Yep, you did. Okay, maybe you should call. And that's where First Stop Health can come in, or something similar to that, where you don't have to then go into, schedule an appointment with your PCP or go to urgent care. You can instead see someone who is virtual or virtually available for a consult and get a better diagnosis or better advice than you would off WebMD. So we're, again, high risk, high functionality. Where's the line?
It needs to be there. I think it needs to be proven to be good, maybe
Mm.
10 times better than getting a virtual real doctor on the phone, until people would accept it as being good enough that you have a fully digital AI solution.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
things are moving very fast in that space.
Yeah.
Now, let's go back to things which are a little bit less fraught with danger and uncertainty. If I, if I think of early childhood development, obviously there's the side of the children, and I think lots of questions and need real expert input to say, would a digital human be a healthy addition or not? But, I think a lot of people that care for children say they love the children, they just hate the parents. Uh, I'm probably one of those parents that are universally hated by the people, because we're always asking questions. We want to know how they're doing and how do you do this, and maybe it's generic questions which are good, but you know, um, maybe it's like, oh, my kid's got a fever. Can I come in today? So it sounds like the core health person, the core care, the core care person, caregiver, is hard to come by.
Hmm.
Small pool of experts. And obviously they need to manage not only the kids, but also the junior support that they have. And they have to manage the parents, I imagine, a lot of the time as well. How do you think a digital human, or could a digital human actually support them to, let's say, offload a bunch of that sort of regular questioning, incoming type calls, by directly providing answers to parents?
I think we're in an interesting time for that. And the same thing that we talked about earlier on in our conversation regarding training and having a digital human there to help support the lead teacher in the room to train and mentor the junior teacher, would be advantageous. I think it comes down to trust. So it's one thing when you're a teacher, an assistant teacher who's learning. It's another thing to be a parent and to ask a digital human question and receive that answer and not want to see the human. So who is the human that's actually caring for my child? I want to know, is it okay to bring my kid in with a 37-degree temperature? Um, and if the digital human says, no, you should take your child to the ER right away, then I would probably, as a parent, say, well, let me talk to you. I want an agent. I kind of like, I would liken this to me
Yes.
calling the credit card company and being like, agents,
Yeah.
I
No,
don't
absolutely.
accept this automation. Right. So I think it comes back to how much, trust would a parent be able to place in a digital human's answers. And so where does the onus or responsibility fall for building that trust? Is it in the person who's programming the digital AI, or is it in the people who are leveraging? So like the educators and the school directors who are leveraging that augmentation for parental communication. And I don't see parental communication or interparental, interschool, whatever, I don't know the right word for it, but like, what is the proper mix where I have enough human interaction, but I also have a digital human to augment my communication? And are the parents going to be receptive to what the digital human is telling them versus what an actual live human is telling them?
Yeah. I mean, there's some interesting research on that
Mm,
that's out there. So the more realistic that the digital human is, and of course, the more consistent that is also with their ability to answer the question correctly. But really, if the digital human looks and sounds like a real person, people attribute that realness um, to them, even though they know it's digital. So they
interesting.
assume that they are more intelligent and more capable than, let's say, a cartoon that was able to provide that same answer, or just a chatbot which is providing the words. So they attribute that, and some other interesting research has showed that um, people have the same biases with digital humans they do with real humans. So you know, if you have someone that looks like they know what they're doing and can answer like they know what they're doing, people believe they know what they're doing. Like it all comes together, and they look like a teacher or a caregiver. They have that quality that they're expecting, maybe a nice smile, someone who's really caring and knowledgeable, but not too young, but not too old, whatever, that 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 ideal of a caregiver for your child. And they will respond to that positively. And they also respond positively to people that look and sound like them as well. So
Mm,
and that's,
yes.
totally separate. I think it's just sort of that bias, if someone is a 22-year-old parent, they might, and let's say a mother might respond better to a woman who is maybe a little bit older because they have this expectation, have to have a bit more experience than me, but a young woman who is sharing their knowledge. But maybe if it's a 40-year-old or 50-year-old dad, and, you know, he would rather have speak to someone who looks a bit older and more senior that will correspond to him better. So
Right.
interesting. But then you have to have the trade-off between, is it more like me or is it more like my expectation, or somewhere in between? Like I want it to be a teacher, but I want it to be like me, but maybe I'd rather a female teacher for my child because I have that bias. But I also prefer people that are like me. So maybe it's sort of a middle-aged woman that he would respond best to rather than a young person.
I think they would also need to have a British accent, especially if we were using them here in the United States, because that is also statistically proven to be um, Americans think that someone with a British accent is smarter. Yes.
And the Canadian accent is nicer.
I don't know about the Canadian accent. Well, you've got like, the French in the Quebec province. So they have pretty thick French accents. But
I
then you
was
have
thinking
like,
more of the good old Toronto kind of West.
yes, that's Midwestern. And as what we consider Midwestern, and that is found to be overly um intellectual.
Okay. No, no, I'm sit training. I didn't think to make. I always say, like, see people when they try and recognize a voice and his personality. Canadians are friendly.
Yes.
Oh, um, Americans are full of strong beliefs.
Very opinionated. True.
English are reserved, maybe refined. Australians were not really anywhere except for maybe Ochre and Loud. Uh, but
I
yeah,
feel like
people do
that's
have
it.
these,
It's more
people apply these
associated with like
personalities.
risk taking. And these are, of course, my own biases, right? Like British or UK, they're again more refined, maybe been through more school, which is completely false. That is not true. And
Mhm. Absolutely.
Americans, like Southern Americans, so I'm from the Northeast, and of course we talk faster. We are all mostly Type A. We are um, not overly friendly, which is interesting, but it's cold here most of the time, so I think that's part of the issue. Is like it's just cold, so we're hurrying places. But people from the South, they talk much slower, everything a little bit slower. Of course, that none of this pertains to intellect. And yet,
And yet,
here we are
and,
having this
and
conversation.
all of this carries through to digital humans.
For sure.
So you have to be very careful. I think you have, if you think of the digital human is really a mix of the visual and sound characteristics of the person. And then let's say their functionality, their chatbot functionality, maybe also some additional functionalities that you might have, sensors and whatnot. But it's really, those are the two core things. Um, well, the first two core things. And you already have to create the personality. You already have to create the conversational design or build up that AI just the way you want it to be. And that's a whole process in itself. You also have the additional complexity of, you have to really carefully think about what it is that you're trying to share. Since digital humans do communicate more than chatbot, than the pure text, because of the voice, because of the face, people reading all kinds of things that may or may not be there. You need to actually design how you want that to be. It becomes part of your brand. It becomes part of how you communicate. It also becomes part of how people perceive and whether they accept and whether they like what they see.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a very good point as far as what the brand image is. So from a talent perspective, what I've been using ChatGPT for is to understand when someone Google searches our company, what's coming back to them. So what is our digital reputation? What are they finding? So if I was a candidate doing research on a company, I would absolutely go to Google and say, reviews, employee reviews or Glassdoor or Indeed, not as much for like my position, but I think a lot more people are doing that to understand what are the cliff notes on this company.
Yeah.
And so if there was a digital human who could pop up and say, Here I'm Christine. I work at Little Sprouts, and this has been my experience so far. Do you have any questions for me? I think it would change the way that people search. So change the way that candidates search, and to understand from ChatGPT or just a regular Google search, what what are the things that are coming up? What are the things that the digital human from an employee experience and a talent acquisition side of things are are going to need to address? Because here are the top 5 things that are coming up in a Google search or what ChatGPT is going to tell you. So how do I program a digital me to have answers on the ready for that, or just to have it pre-programmed in as a
Yeah.
as a greeting.
hmm Yeah. I love it. I mean, I think that's actually a whole different use case, which is the digital human like introduction to the organization. You can think of it as a introduction for potential parents that trying to work out should they bring their kids there, for potential employees who
Mhm.
maybe want to work there themselves. In both cases, it can be quite a powerful way to share your brand, your values, discuss what you believe in, discuss how you work. why it's a great place to live, to work, to bring your kids into play, what you'll teach them, how, uh, all of these things.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of use cases. I mean, we've covered at least 3, I think, maybe even 4.
Um, I think we've covered actually 5 use cases, but multiple of them could be actually the same tool if you think about it. So
Yes.
if you think of a training for an internal person, this is how we do things. If you think of a training for parents, this is how we do things. You can use them the same way. If you think about Q&A for parents, to help them on the more administrative, operational type questions, those 3 things could actually they're kind of different use cases, but they all come down to, you know, one digital human basically being there to answer everybody's questions about pretty much anything. Um, then we had the healthcare for children. I'd put that still a little bit separately because it has significant ramifications in what you'd be building
For
and
sure,
how
yeah.
and all of that. And then there's this higher level piece, which is, introduction to the organization. Um, and in reality, you could actually join that into, it's like, hey, I'm Stefan. I'm your digital human, um, you know, representative, and ask me, would you like to ask me about our organization? Do you have any questions about, you know, how to specific questions about how we manage, or suggested ways to manage children, issues you may be having with children? Could be just, one broad, knowledgeable solution, and could be a way of also people saying, it's like a bit like WebMD. Oh, I've got a kid and I'm always using, I'm always using this one company's digital human to think about how I want to solve a particular problem with my kid. Now, maybe I should actually put my kid into that healthcare center because, into that daycare center because I really like their suggestions. I like how they do. So
And
sharing
so
so
almost like
much
an enrollment tool.
could be an enrollment tool.
So
Yeah.
it gives a whole other perspective to gated content. So, of course, my background is marketing and sales with a little I call it talent light before I got here. But um, I think it's an interesting idea to provide the content because of course we're as marketers constantly trying to provide content that's one unique, speaks to the quality of our brand, quality of our product. And then, of course, not give away too much so that someone still wants to come in and buy my product. So I think it's an interesting idea to talk about how a digital human could be that resource for a parent who might not yet be ready to enroll their child, especially post COVID. I think a lot of people kept their infants home longer. And so if I'm constantly, like you said, leveraging one particular digital human for as my kind of learning resource or my parent support resource, then would I be more interested in enrolling my child at that center because I trust their
Yeah.
resource
Yep.
and their advice?
Yeah. And I mean, at least I've seen it with myself. Like, when you're using somebody's knowledge resource, you build up a lot of respect for that institution or that organization. So you instantly have built a trust and a personal connection. Um, and I think knowledge, at the end of the day, I would say knowledge is becoming somewhat worthless. Uh, it's free. Like you can go and ask ChatGPT and it'll provide knowledge and you can ask Google and it'll provide you links. You can get most of the knowledge out there.
Mm.
While you're doing it, you only have a connection to Google. That's, or to ChatGPT. That is your connection. But if you can create high quality content, then you can actually create a connection with you as an organization. Uh, and I think that could be quite powerful. even if people aren't paying for that knowledge that you have carefully put together and your methodology, they trust that you are the ones that were smart enough to pull it together in such a good way. And therefore, your quality of your education, because these digital humans still won't change nappies. I think we agreed that at the beginning. So I think the knowledge of how to be a good caretaker of a child, you could arguably say is out there, but getting people you actually trust to now do it for you is all about that personal connection and trust. And could such a digital human, provide a great service broadly, but actually build up that trust that you may not have for, a random childcare daycare center down the road that you know nothing about.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. It's, going back to what you had brought up about unconscious bias and how we need to see ourselves represented in the person that we're talking to so that we are relating. I think that would be, need to be considered when we're talking about that. But of course, generating high quality content as an attraction tool, more on, well, the enrollment side, but I can see it also from a talent side as well, where, it's we're using it as a tool so that we're not out there just cold calling
Yeah.
prospective families, which I don't believe that we do. I know I'm not on the sales side, but I don't believe that we're doing that. So anyway,
Go to
but I
Boston
think it's more
where
of a
babies are born and hand out leaflets physically to everyone. You'll be
I
sticking
mean,
them soon.
we're having a bit of a childcare crisis here in the United States. I'm not sure you're aware. I don't know what the general climate is in
Switzerland, it can be
Australia.
tough.
Yeah.
I live in Switzerland here. It can be really tough. Some people have real issues getting a spot.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
not everywhere, but near where they live, etc. And then, of course, everything died in COVID, and it became some closed, and I think a lot easier to find a spot.
Hmm.
And now I think it's probably getting back to being much much more close to again.
Yeah. It's very challenging. I mean, here we don't subsidize care as much as in Europe. It's like for example, our parent company is actually based in France, and they're called Babylon Group, and so they operate centers all over Europe.
Oh wow!
Um, yeah, and I actually think we have some in Switzerland. I'm not 100% sure, but Babylon is in 12 countries and operate 1,100 centers. That's including our 39. So many, but on that side of things, care can be very difficult to find, here especially. And it from on the talent side, it can be very difficult to attract workers into the field. So caregivers into the field, because historically the pay has been, or wages have been low. And as a company, we're working to remedy that with a lot of support from also the state, and
Yes,
we're
yeah,
waiting on the federal government to get on board. But many of the states in that we operate in have passed significant legislation because they understand that teachers without caregivers in early childhood education, the workforce is impacted. So you have a 3-year-old daughter. If you couldn't find care for her, how would that impact you and your partner working? And that has been shown to be a huge detriment here in the United States. And I'm sure the same research is available and the same or consistent in Europe too. So, from our perspective, it's how can we make this field attractive
yep,
and really understand that this is a good career to go into. Um, so going back to what our conversation theme is here, I think that our, digital humans could help talk about that, not just from our perspective, but also on, from the federal government or the state government or even a college. Like, I see a lot of different areas where that could augment humans saying, hey, this is a great field to be in, and here are the reasons why.
Yes. And you'd have this person, 24/7 ready to ask anyone that wants to ask the question, why should I get into this field, with a really positive, exciting answer. Now, everything you've said, it just really struck me how similar, the issues that you're mentioning were to, let's say, healthcare, which is another caregiving,
Yeah.
area, historically underpaid, or poorly paid versus other potential options, um, and high stress often. So there's a lot of good reasons not to go into the field. I don't know about early childhood. I mean,
It's
I
similar.
think
So from a talent perspective, there's like when I look at someone who doesn't maybe have childcare experience, if they have healthcare experience, that translates very well to the climate that they will experience in childcare.
there's lots of research in healthcare. Like, why is there so much burnout in nurses?
Yeah.
Why are nurses leaving and not coming back? And a lot of it's just to do with, too many patients. So they have like the magic ratio, let's say 5-1 or 3-1 or 6-1, depending on the type of patients, day shift, night shift, lots of different factors. I think a lot of these are not set in stone. It's more each hospital needs to manage this carefully. I think with healthcare, it's kind of being defined, which is maybe a good thing. Um, then you have everything around the sort of the different roles in the old, like, how the doctors treat the nurses, and and in particular, a couple of ages, like what work they are doing. So one of the areas that created a lot of stress for qualified nurses was working below their qualification,
Mm.
led to a lot of stress and, more likely, let's say, to have a burnout or leave the field. They've done all this training, they've got all this expertise, and then they spend their day changing nappies, of bigger
Of adults. Yeah.
grown people. And, that's not what they signed up for. Maybe they signed up for that at the beginning, but they've spent their life, getting all these additional skills for a reason, and they want to be able to apply them. And they're good people. They want to care, and they want to apply their knowledge to care for people. And they can't do that because they're doing low grade work, below their license. And, or they're doing like paperwork, lots of paperwork, you know, it's stupid paperwork. It's even irrelevant paperwork, but it has to be done because it's like required. Now, if we translate all of these kinds of issues that we hear from healthcare into early childhood, care, do you see that some of these may be leading to, say, higher rotation of staff, particularly for that, senior caregiver that we were talking about before?
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring up the kind of operating below your qualifications. And I see where that could definitely be something in healthcare. I'm not sure how relevant that would be in childcare because regardless of whether you're an assistant teacher or not, or you're a qualified teacher, you're still going to change a nappy. Because you have
I get
7
it.
children between 2 adults and, well, there's 7 nappies to change.
Yep.
So we're split that. But I think there's a little bit more equity in teacher qualified versus an assistant. But of course, one has the credential, the other does not. I think where the source, like the biggest source of burnout would reside is in the high, fast paced environment where there's a lot of things going on at once that you have to deal with. And again, like think about 7 children that you're caring for, and that's an infant ratio, but 7 children that you and your co-teacher have the responsibility for. You have to manage their sleep schedules, their eating schedules, their allergies, their, communicating curriculum to them because even though they're little, they still have milestones that they're hitting. And then also add on the parent communication. So what are the parents asking for? And nowadays, we use a technology called Camboo, which is an iPad app, and we're able to send constant communication to the parents. So they get pictures throughout the day of what their child is doing. They see what their schedule is. They see how many nappies have they changed today for my child? What was their feeding schedule? How much did they eat? What did they eat?
Does that
So
reduce the stress, or does that actually add stress because now they have a whole bunch of additional work they have to do? Or does it reduce stress because parents stop calling them because they already know what's happening with their kids? So we have the same app for our
come
child
to you,
care center. Not the same one, but it
but
sounds
similar.
essentially the same. And it's great because like something important, we get the message. If nothing comes in, we're not too worried. If we're planning dinner, we might just, okay, how have they done? If we come home and they're getting a little bit unwell, they're not 100%, we'll check, what did they eat? What did they like? So we just know that we know it's there, so we don't need to bother them. So, the check in, check out becomes a lot quicker in the day because we say, hi, everything good? Yeah. Okay. Everything else in the app, we'll do. Um,
Yeah.
and
But from
so
the
the net,
educator perspective.
doesn't make it easier for them, do you think? Does it make it less stressful? Or have you heard that they actually say it's more stressful now that they have to deal with technology as well?
I think it's so much part of our operating persona. I mean, we're so accustomed to having screens that it's just one more thing to do, but not in a negative one more thing to do, like not just adding on to that stress. Again, I have not ever been in a classroom as a teacher or an educator, so I can't speak from that perspective, but there used to be paperwork. So instead of the digital communication, it was a piece of paper that went home. So I think it's just sort of transferred from it now. I'm maybe having less of a conversation with this child's parents because I've been communicating with them and I've been posting pictures of their child doing, a water activity or whatever. Like, so they know what's kind of been going on through the day. So you don't then have to answer 7 parents and say, what did you do today? What were the activities that you did today? So I think it actually reduces, and this is another, like where a digital human could probably come in, um, is like, where where is the intersection between that communication? Do you have to talk to a parent afterwards if they ask? Like, so if I show up to pick up my child, and even though you have sent me all of the Canva messages, I've seen 15 pictures of my child participating in whatever curriculum is being delivered, I still want to know, how did they like the carrot? Like, could could that be one added stress for the teacher and the educator to communicate with the parent? And could that also be addressed by a digital human? Maybe. So
I
when it
mean,
comes to burnout, I think going back to the idea of burnout, it is absolutely real. I think it's a lot more centered in our industry around time off. So in understanding like how you take a break and when you get that break. So we've done some, because here in the United States, we don't believe in taking a month off in August, although I would fully support that, such as our parent company does. But we've looked at adding more time off, so paid time off, and making sure that it's guaranteed. And I think that's part of the stress picture. It's not all of it.
yeah. Okay. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And, I think it's great that we're talking about digital humans, but I think the word nappy has come up around 20 times. So definitely at first for this particular podcast. Um, and now as we sort of start closing this up, I think we've kind of dug into a lot of the most relevant areas, and we've got this sort of healthcare for children. And I'm just going to park that on the side because that's, I guess that goes this whole healthcare space, very specific. And we're going to do some more podcasts on healthcare, to specifically look. And I think child healthcare is going to be lumped in as part of that. But when I look at then the other ideas, they all really revolve around this sort of internal, external communication. Uh, you know, parents who are not yet customers. So let's say sales, like introductions to the organization or potential employees and why they would want to join. And then for existing parents, or existing customers, let's say, and existing staff to learn the standard ways of doing things. Um, so that really is sort of 4 different digital humans that would share a lot of the knowledge. Could even just be one digital human, or it could be split into 4. To have, for example, that personality that matches each of those different needs. If you're talking about your child, you might want to have someone that represents more caregiver. If you're, with a lot of experience. But if you're
English,
looking
British accent for sure.
with a
Definitely
British
British
accent, or a
Yeah.
Canadian if you want someone nice, or wouldn't get an Australian. That's clear, too crazy. Or you get a and then maybe for sales, you have a different personality that you want to share. You want it to be more a little bit showing that you're a professional organization. You might want to have someone who maybe represents the CEO or even is the CEO of the organization, talking about their organization and why they built it up, et cetera, et cetera. So there could be a very personal perspective in some of that as well. I think that there could be some interesting differences, but essentially it's one, let's say, knowledge sharing application.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's interesting to consider that there is a common theme, and a lot of it is training, not just in the classroom, but also for the client, so staff and client, and understanding that maybe some of those topics are very consistent between both groups.
So, okay, let's split this up into, I think, 3 main options. One is basically a sales tool for parents, basically meet the CEO. Once
Mhm.
again, Mike share a lot of knowledge as well about how you do things, the methodologies, but it's really a different focused conversation. Maybe also getting them, making sure that by the end of it, if they want to, they can set up a call to, meet the right person to do a visit or learn more, in person. Then you have this sort of, let's not call it a sales tool. Let's call it more a hiring tool, to, for prospective employees, because you
Yeah.
said it is a bit of a challenge. It's a hunt for talent.
It is a hunt.
So could you use this as a way to proactively contact and get yourself out there in a way that is friendly, that people can learn more about you in advance? That's the second one. And then I think we really just have this knowledge base that helps parents and or staff really understand the standard ways of doing things and all the
Yep.
knowledge that goes with it. And even potentially for third party being additionally a sort of, say a sales channel.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I think we covered all the bases. And from a talent perspective, I think it's interesting to look at that as a sourcing tool. So, when you look at resumes, you're going to reach out to that person, whatever job seeker platform they're on, and could you send your digital human as
Have a
an
chat. Like
emissary
to know more
who
about, have a
tracks?
chat with our digital human. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No
So
stress,
it's
Yeah.
it's less about it's less about the it, convincing the candidate, but more about, let me tell you a little bit about the company that's reached out to you. So it's it. That's it. I like that.
Um, and it sort of reminds me, I believe it's the Mayo Clinic that has a really good website, maybe like WebMD, but it's their own private one. And, I often find that the other like WebMD and there's different versions in
Yeah,
UK,
there's a few.
they can they can all kind of become rather generic. And I always felt that when I did the Mayo Clinic answers, they were like as if someone had written them for me. They were much more, they seemed somehow higher quality
Mhm. More
and
personal.
somehow more somehow higher quality. It's like they don't just tell you everything. They really try and give you the most likely impression of what things are and talk about what could be maybe some of the more advanced options for you, and I think they do specialize in advanced, healthcare. So my thought was, if I ever anything happened to me and I was in the US, I'd want to go to the Mayo Clinic. And I have no idea why, but in my head, they are the best because they're the ones that provide general information that is super high quality. Now, I don't know if this transfers to this space, but I think it's this unplanned subconscious um, a- appreciation that we have for quality and it's this sort of subtle branding based on things that we actually should believe. Because hey, if they can give me the best information on what I should do, and I'm not a patient, imagine what they could do for me if I was a patient. And maybe this transfers nicely over to health to early childhood care as well.
I think
So
it does it in that you look at it from from a career journey perspective. So what you're saying is, I trust the Mayo Clinic because they've given me really good advice, really high quality advice. They have firmly established that they are the leader in healthcare, whatever I specialization. I mean, the Mayo Clinic does have a very strong reputation here, so you're not wrong. And they are one of like the foremost healthcare providers and places for research here in the United States. But from our perspective as an early childhood educator, and also in my realm of talent, I think what it comes down to when we're looking at especially Gen Z now, their research is saying that they are looking for jobs that enable them to have a firm social emotional well-being or sense of social emotional well-being. And they want to know that their company cares about them. And they want tools, training, and advancement opportunities. So from that perspective, like we know that Gen Z is the biggest population that we are hiring right now. And
yeah,
so
makes sense.
how do we establish that we will give them those tools, training, and opportunities to advance their career? And so from, what you've outlined as far as the Mayo Clinic and their resource library, this could be something similar, and it is something that we've already done to a certain degree to understand like what are the resources, like how can I point you in the right direction, even if you're not right for like one of my locations. I'm still going to tell you where you can access free education in the state of Massachusetts or in Vermont, and make sure that you know that there's a lot of opportunity for you as an educator. And how that's kind of come back to reward us is that many of those candidates who have chosen not to pursue the opportunity at that time, because maybe it was location, maybe it was salary, maybe it was time committed or schedule or whatever it was, many of them have come back
Mhm.
because we've provided that resource completely with no strings attached.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have
Right.
to work for
You
me
put
for me to
power
give
into
you
the
done.
universe, good can come back. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's similar, and I I definitely would be in agreement with you that there's a case to be made. Provide the resource because it'll pay off later.
One last question before we go and prioritize these three different tools that we we've looked at. What about languages? Is language an issue for you? I mean, especially if we think of, let's say what parents are supposed to do and not do regarding let's say their children and how they bring them into, to your establishment, coming in late, coming in early, um, things like, oh, do I need to feed them breakfast beforehand or will you give them breakfast or at what time? And these, just these, do you often have language barriers that make this an issue with, between the parents and the institution? And would a multilingual digital human play an important role in that space?
A short answer, yes. I think it would play a really important role. And I see it more on the talent side where I know what schools of ours have multiple languages spoken inside them. So I can say, okay, I have a Portuguese speaker. I know which school that they're going to be supported best at. And does that work out all the time? No, because there's a big variety of languages. Um, so I think having a digital human who had the capacity to speak in 5 different languages would definitely be helpful. I mean, I'm having a conversation about a preferred language for an employee. What is their preferred language? And her preferred language actually is Amharic because she's Ethiopian. And it's interesting trying to find someone who can translate in Amharic because that's not like we don't have a huge Ethiopian population. I don't think we have anyone at any of our schools who speaks Amharic. And so therefore that from a talent perspective, that limits an already small pool of candidates.
So even if they didn't speak English, you would hire someone who.
No, so she speaks English and Amharic and probably something else. But we there's a training hitch. So communicating certain
Like standard
expectations.
processes and how to do things.
Correct.
Okay, no,
And
we
how to
like it
support
this
that
way.
person. So I think
They would be able to learn better from the digital human than they would be from the real expert human that's right in front of them, maybe purely for a linguistic reason.
yeah, correct. Like I'm not saying, because there's all sorts of, I mean, even in the English dialect, there are so many different words that mean other things. Like to two people, you use the word nappies. I use the word diapers. Do I know what nappies means? Yes, I do. But what if I didn't? So, like that's just one example of how a digital human could help.
Yep.
Like, what's
Hey.
your English dialect?
Yeah. So now comes, let's say the last step. If you were to think about these 3 tools, the sales tool, for the parents, the hiring tool to attract talent, and this knowledge tool, based on your standard ways of working, which of these 3 do you think would, let's say, be the easiest to, let's start with easy. Which of these would be the easiest? Let's just think about ease, to implement.
To implement? Is that what you said?
Ease to get all the knowledge together to know that it really is,
So I think I'd probably have to understand more about what the process to developing one is before I answered that question. Like how much information is needed from the human to create the digital version of, let's just say, me. So I guess I would ping that back to you, like how much information is needed from
so
the
the
human.
question, there's 2 aspects to that. One is availability, and the other one is, and both can be problematic. So you can say, you know what, our methodology is based on these 10 textbooks that we have, and we do everything according to these 10 textbooks. Beautiful. We would still need to convert that into, all of the relevant content, or, have at least accessible in one way or the other through conversational AI. There's a bunch of different ways of doing it. So there you have lots of content. So that would be the challenge, but it would be quite easy from a process perspective. It would just take a bunch of time. Then you have other things which might be, let's say, a sales tool for parents, where you could say, well, the knowledge is quite simple, but we actually find that there's like 30 different types of parents, and we need to speak to them in 30 different kinds of ways. And so we need a digital human to understand, maybe in a very specific way, the kind of person they are. So that could actually be a lot of complexity, because there's no, it's not like you have a list of 30 people and how to recognize them based on their profile or, their first sentence. So it becomes quite difficult to, to allocate that, and then to actually build up a personalized sales, or you might say, you know what, the sales journey is all the same. They just only care about quality, availability. They care about cost. They want to see that there's some real humans there. And it's all about, what's the shortest distance to my home? That's all they care about. Whatever. So these are the things that I mean, I can't answer these questions, but these would be the elements that make it either more complex or more simple.
Yeah. I think the sales tool might be the easiest. Just from the idea of understanding what our current enrollment looks like
Mhm.
and what the service we're providing and who that demographic is.
Yeah.
Or what those demographics are. So I
Mhm.
think that would probably, and I apologize, my dog is snoring like you would not believe. I hope you can't hear him. But anyway,
I can.
um, okay. Sometimes he can be heard, but I so from a sales perspective, I think that one would probably be the easiest to build. Um, followed by potentially talent. I would actually go more towards training. That one would be a whole lot harder, and take a lot more time because there's so much content. And again, the regulations differ from state to state. We operate in 4 different states. So each state would be unique.
Oh, well,
But I do
yeah.
think
Okay.
that one would change the way that training is being delivered.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I think that one would probably be where we might focus if we were to look at it from a
But that would be
point.
the most complex. But then,
Yeah.
so that's in terms of complexity. Um, which of these three do you think, like, if you were to say, hey, I can fix these three things, which one do you think the powers that be in the organization, US and France, would be like, "Oh, yes, that's a pain. That's a thorn in my side. It's a lot of pain. If you think you can help solve it, let's do it tomorrow." So which is the most painful?
I Talent runs really well. I will give us a high five on that one. So we don't have an acquisition issue. I think
Okay.
where we could be better is on the retention side,
Hmm.
and training comes along with retention. Again, we talked about tools, training, and opportunity. So I do believe that this one would be the most impactful. Again, it would need to be presented in a way that shows all the benefits.
Yep.
And also points towards scalability, right? Like, so we're a network that's growing, and that means understanding how to train effectively and consistently. So that I think that'd be the
Okay, so
one.
that'd be number one. Then do you think the sales tool would be number two, or the talent? Or would you just combine them into one? If you say the talent piece isn't such a problem, then you basically would have one person that is there to sell to parents, but people interested in the company can also have a chat about the company itself.
Yeah, I mean, considering the childcare crisis in the United States right now, the the amount of spots that are available are quite limited. So there is a significant wait list. Um, so I think that one would be a harder sell if we were talking about who we're presenting it to. The talent one, while I would put it third of the three, it might be something that would be more favorable, um, as far as like selling would be concerned, like selling to our
Yep.
company
Yeah.
leadership is.
Mm. So very good. So we have number one overall would be focusing on those training tools, multilingual training tools for
Mhm.
individuals, parents, and staff, um, relevant to whatever regulatory setting they're in. The second would be maybe a general kind of sales tool on the website, or people can, have a chat with the CEO and learn about what you believe in and your values and how you do things and why you're special. And that could also help for hiring. But in any case, a hiring piece could be relevant maybe in different geographies where you have more issues with hiring than in the US.
Correct. Yeah. I agree with that.
Cool. I think that's it. We've dug in. We've spent about an hour. We've looked at what is it that what would be the biggest challenges that a digital human could solve in the space of early childhood development, looking at HR and some of the other related roles of learning and development, even touching on sales. And I think we have a pretty exciting list, and great to see that one idea that came out that really took the cake is something that I wouldn't have necessarily even thought of if somebody even suggested it like randomly. Like, is this an idea? I'd be like, yeah, like why not? But why? And
Yeah.
based on this conversation, we see how really it links to the opportunities and the happiness of the staff, the availability of quality knowledge for the parents, the reduction of let's say lower value type questions that could be easily answered, and allowing people to be more empowered, which is I think what digital humans really is about, is to empower the people in the organization and users and customers.
Cool. It was a very edifying discussion. I think it was, we looked at a bunch of different ideas and real life instances and discovered some new stuff.
And speaking of early childhood learning, I think you might be up to in the background. I have a young child that's waiting for me. So let's call this podcast to a close. Thank you so much for anyone who's seeing this. Please do like, subscribe, comment, share your thoughts. Would love to hear from you. All right. And thank you so much for being here today, Cristine.
Thanks for having me.
This was the Real Digital Humans podcast. Please like, follow, or subscribe to hear more.